Hey guys, back with some more Bazaar stuff, and this video isn't a regular run. I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on the season so far, and I played a lot. I've just hit Legend today, so I have played enough, I think, to get a bead on every, strong thing so far, and, just kind of having a look at, we've had a lot of really strong builds um, throughout this season. I just thought I'd go through some of them and talk about the changes that have been made and how dominant each one was, and etc. etc. Alright, so first build we have is the pre-nerf hydraulic press. I unfortunately did not get to play this, but it looked ridiculous. So you can see here, obviously, the hydraulic press. Thank you to Lockhart. I found this in the Bazaar Discord. You can see, obviously, it has a vehicle tag, so it's got multicast, it's got the core tag, and they're effectively killing someone instantly after 4 seconds, basically. So this was a short. This got hotfixed, like, I think 4 or 5 hours after the season went live. So it wasn't around for too long. However, it was a menace. It was a real menace while it was up. So we'll move on now to, I think, which was one of the more prevalent. So this is Dinos V1. So this is the old version of the Dinos where Mama saw, Diana saw, if they had a certain amount of items, it would destroy something. And then obviously they did nerf it Tanky Anky slightly, so it doesn't, he used to take away, at diamond level, it was 75 damage away from weapons, I believe. So weapons on your enemy's board start with 100 less damage. And so yeah, post hydraulic press, this was your meta build. This was absolutely crazy. Like obviously you get a ton of destruction on dinos. This one right here doesn't seem that great because obviously we don't have the enough tags for Dinosaur to have its 3-second cooldown, but it's still nonetheless like a ton of shield, a ton of damage, and it's still good. Like, it is still good in a different way though. So it doesn't, you're not required to have like a certain amount of items on your enemy's board now. It's just on first usage, which it sounds slightly worse, but the reality is you're probably only getting one destroy into a fight anyway, especially when you start meta scaling your dinosaurs up really high. But this was version 1. And so after this, we move on to Blank Slate / Relic Mac. And this is obviously a super high roll, but nonetheless, it is a build along the lines of what it was. So this is Permafreeze Mac. So we can see Dig Site. It has a 3-second cooldown and it charges an adjacent relic. So essentially after 3 seconds, your enemy's board is permafrozen. And it doesn't, I have done builds like this where I've frozen like 8 wide builds, like 8 item builds permanently. Like these can go ridiculously fast. This was probably the most hated point of the meta. I think people enjoyed this the least. Like obviously we have Blank Slate, which was so awful, and I'm glad they nerfed the amount of freeze it had. Then we also had the Frost Totem as well, which was also horrible. I don't think the legendary items were too big of an issue. I'm glad they scaled back the changes a little bit. However, yeah, it was a really big issue when it plagued the late game because obviously freeze is like, apart from Radiant and, certain other specific builds, freeze is, it's the be all end all. Like, if you have freeze in any form of damage like this, you lock down your opponent's board completely, there's nothing they can do about it. And that's just it. Like, it's the be all end all basically, board lockdown. If you can lock down your enemy's board completely, then you win. Like, and there's nothing to be done. So, however, This did get nerfed eventually, and then we move back to now we have the second version of dinos. So we have, again, Mamasaur, Dinosaur, all of the dino archetypes, and it's effectively the same. We're meta scaling our dinosaurs. In the late game, we're trying to get our dinosaur at a really high rate, at that low cooldown. And then, yeah, we're running a board like this. We're probably having Tanky Anki in there somewhere as well, instead of one of these items. And yeah, that's kind of the goal, is to, it's just meta scaling. And it isn't, I would say this isn't as bad as Railgun at the moment, just because it's not as easy to generate. Dinosaur, it's a slightly more difficult tag to get. Like the majority of these items, apart from Dinosaur, start at silver. So it's a little bit harder to find because it's a bigger item pool. Because, you know, day one, being able to find a railgun, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is a lot easier than finding, you know, your large Mamasaur, your mediums at silver, basically. Like, you can find a Tanky Yankee and a Dinosaur, fine, no problem. You could probably get a Primal Core most of the time as well, but then you're not always getting your Dinosaur. So I think it's in a decent spot right now. It's still a little bit strong, but I think it's okay at the moment. And then we have our railgun. I don't know why it zoomed out like that, but we have another build from the Bazaar Discord. This is like the traditional, like, you know, this is every railgun build ever, basically. So crit core, we have the railgun on the far right. It gives us natural scaling on crit, obviously. When we upgrade our core throughout the game, this person hasn't really done it, but it is so easy to assemble, which I think is the main problem, is that you can just find railgun at bronze, and it's so ridiculously easy. That, I think, is the problem. And everyone is experiencing it right now. I don't think the archetype of the railgun was a bad thing. It was fine when it started at silver. I don't think anyone thought that it was like a bad item. It wasn't particularly amazing, but it wasn't bad either. So I think it really should just be reverted to starting at silver with the same rates, and then that's fine. I mean, it's funny to think about this, and when we think back through the closed beta, Railgun used to be like the exact same as this, and then it also had multicast. That was a real funny time. I do remember when Railgun had multicast, but then back in the closed beta, there were a lot more broken things. You could basically play any hero you wanted and completely dominate as long as you knew how to play them, really. Apart from a specific couple of things, like I remember Monitor Lizard, that was a truly awful couple of weeks. That thing was out for a long time. Like, for all of you people who are complaining about Railgun, who are complaining about you know, blank slate, like, the turnover for these things wasn't that bad. It took, yes, a couple of days. Blank slate was over a weekend. I think maybe we don't understand because, you know, more people are playing on the weekend. But these people, like, the people who work on the game, they're not working on the weekend, man. Like, that's, you know, they have time off. And, you know, yes, you have to listen to feedback and you have to make the game good for your players, but the game, it wasn't unbearable. It wasn't unbearable. You could still get a certain amount of wins without running into freeze mac. Like, you can get unlucky, obviously, but, you know, like, I come from a time in the closed beta where Monitor Lizard, you see it, and it was in the game for a long time, and you just lose, basically, and there isn't a lot of ways to counter it. But that is kind of the whole thing so far. So obviously this is the current state of the game, is Railgun, and then probably the second version of Dinos as well. I think that it's not terrible at the moment. I think that Dinos doesn't necessarily need to be nerfed, but I think Railgun needs to be changed. I think that is the next thing that needs to happen. I think the majority, I think a lot of the other builds are in a good spot. But yeah, I think the state of the game at the moment is, it's not bad. Like, it always could be better, and I think this season, so far, has been just one really good build after the other. Like, you know, Hydraulic Press, and then we had Dinos version 1, then we had Blank Slate, and now we have Railgun. So it's like, you know, it does kind of suck as an archetype when the Bazaar is supposed to be like a every run is different, and you know, a rock paper scissors type deal where no one build should really dominate in the Bazaar. But this season so far, we have had that. I'd argue with every single build is that obviously there are counters to those builds, but in the majority of cases, they have all been, you know, they've all been the archetype of like, you just play this and it gets you a pretty consistent, you know, 7 to 10 wins and you get there. Like it's never, yeah, it is. I think this season, it is, I love the content that's been released, but the items and the builds, they have been a plague. And I know I just said not to complain because, you know, coming from the closed beta, these things used to last longer. So they're doing a really good job of, you know, they've got a relatively quick turnaround. But like, we have been turning around quick with hotfixes, but then we haven't been reaching a point where the game is, you know, where we're back to, you know, it felt like late last season we had eels, and then maybe before, like pre-eels, it felt like the game was maybe in a pretty decent spot. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts about the season so far. Let me know what you think about each of these builds and the way that this season has gone so far. I think it's definitely been an interesting one, to say the least. And hey, yeah, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, do whatever you can. Help support the channel. We're almost at 100 subscribers. Thank you so much for supporting me. I've really, really been loving doing this. I love the Bazaar. I love making content for you guys. And I want to keep going. So thank you. I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.